The ceasefire request sat on the desk for 4 seconds before Maren Solis read it. Not because she needed time to process it. The words were simple enough, 41 characters in the hegemony's standard diplomatic script, transmitted from a common vessel that had arrived 11 hours ago with 280 warships in the specific confidence of an institution that had never been wrong about anything it decided in advance. She read it twice. Outside the sealed door of the diplomatic room, she could hear the operations center, the low continuous hum of data feeds, someone calling out a grid coordinate, the muffled percussion of a status board updating. She had stopped hearing those sounds around R4. Now she heard them again. She pulled the keyboard toward her. Sable's voice came through the open channel. "He hasn't responded to the initial contact window yet." "He will," Maren said. She typed herself. "No routing. No legal review. No consultation." 13 years inside the Assembly's procedural architecture. And she knew exactly when it was not necessary. Complete and unconditional withdrawal of all Solathi hegemony forces from the Cradle system. Full reparations for all damage sustained. Assessed by an independent Assembly Commission. Fleet Commander Vortih to appear before the full Convergence Assembly. In person. Within 30 days. She sent it. Then she sat back and looked at the wall. Not because she was uncertain. It was the first moment in 11 hours when no one needed anything from her. And she was allowing herself exactly that one moment. The hum of the operations center. The pale light from the status screens. The particular quiet that belongs to rooms where the largest thing that was going to happen has already happened. 14 minutes later, Vortich's response arrived. Full acceptance. All terms. She read it. Closed the channel. Asked Sable what the next open item was. What happened in those 11 hours and the 9 years before them is what I am here to tell you. Stay close. You will want to hear how this ends. 13 years before Maren typed those words, she arrived at the Convergent Spire on a transport vessel that the Assembly's docking registry logged. Accurately, as a provisional member diplomatic conveyance. Standard class. No escort. 1 passenger. 2 staff. The spire was anchored by gravitational tether above a collapsed binary start in slow spiral below the station's keel, their light coming up through the floor panels of every session hall in pale reddish pulses. The Assembly's Grand Convocation Hall held 340 tiered seats arranged in descending curves around a hollow central floor, each tier elevated above the last. The delegates at the top looking down on the central podium from a height that required magnification to resolve individual expressions. The provisional tier was on the 3rd level from the bottom. Earth's marker was in the 9th position, center row. The chair was standard issue assembly gray. Maren put both hands flat on the desk and looked at the podium far below. The SS&VO, or had been the Velurans senior observer for 300 years. Velurans attended every session. As institutional historians, they did not vote, did not hold resource claims, did not speak unless addressed. They watched and they wrote. And the SS&VO had the quality of attention completely still, completely present, that Maren learned. In her first month, to treat as a signal. When he went very still, something worth watching was happening. He went still the first time she spoke in the hall. A procedural matter. 3rd item on a routine agenda. 9 words of allotted time in the provisional member comment period. She used 7, but they were precise and in the correct order. And they landed at the exact moment the senior BLUV delegate had left a gap he had not intended to leave. The motion passed likely differently than it would have otherwise. The SS&VO's secondary eyelid, normally invisible, dropped halfway across his left eye and stayed there for 4 seconds. That was 13 years ago. Maren had been paying attention to every session since. The motion that changed everything was introduced by Delegate K.R.A. Avond Th. Senior Plenipotentiary of the Solathi hegemony. He had arranged the votes 3 weeks prior. The session date was simply when the procedural window opened that he had been holding clear. When the Th was 8.5 feet tall. His chitin plates were deep label bow, layered across his chest and shoulders in sections that moved independently when he breathed. His pale gold eyes did not track lateral movement the way mammalian eyes do. They updated their focus in discrete jumps, giving conversations with him the unsettling quality of being assessed in intervals. 3 cicatrix lines crossed his left shoulder plate. In 40 years of resource negotiations and annexation motions, he had never lost a vote he arranged in advance. He presented from the central podium with the unhurried authority of someone who had already verified the outcome twice. Data charts on the shared display resource surveys, military assessments, Infrastructure catalogs. The survey had been conducted by 3 independent verification teams. It was 8 years old. The system presents no meaningful operational complexity. On the TH said, the third planet's deposits are classified Tier 1 critical resources. The indigenous population maintains no credible defensive infrastructure. Their fleet is comprised of repurposed civilian transports. His gold eyes moved across the tiers. The hegemony proposes structured integration. Populations maintained under standard governance frameworks. This is not punitive. It is, in the simplest available terms, practical. From the upper tiers, the Golfani block representative leaned toward his counterpart and said something that produced a brief, shared, dismissive sound. The BLUVian delegation had returned to their consoles. Telorinar, the junior BLUVian delegate, was the only one in that section still watching the podium. He was 28 years old by his species count, barely credentialed by assembly standards. He had been watching Marin's desk for the past 4 minutes. The SS&BOR's secondary eyelid was down. Marin's hands were flat on the desk. She stood up. She did not raise her hand. She did not wait for recognition. She rose from the provisional tier and spoke into the open air of the hall in a voice that was level and entirely without performance. Grand Speaker, I am formally requesting this motion be tabled pending a comprehensive review of current intelligence on the Cradle System's defensive infrastructure. Speaker Hatari Scialun 3,800 years old. Moving with the careful economy of something that had long ago decided the universe rarely required urgency, turned her long pale head toward Marin's tier. Your objection is noted. Delegate Solis. Delegate on the TH. Respond. On the TH turn. His secondary jaw, the smaller structure behind his primary mandible, slid forward once and settled. Delegate Solis. We acknowledge this motion places your delegation in a difficult position. The survey data was independently verified by 3 separate teams. It is current and comprehensive. They pause. What we are proposing is orderly and proportionate. Marin waited until he had finished. Your survey is 8 years old. The hall did not go quiet. It was already quiet. But something shifted in the quality of the quiet, the difference between a room that is silent because nothing is happening and a room that is silent because everyone has decided, simultaneously, to stop doing anything else. Surveys of this classification, on the TH said, are conducted once and archived. No species we have assessed has changed significantly in 8 years. Correct. Stern said, no species you have previously assessed. She kept her hands flat on the desk. Your teams came to our system. They documented our research installations, our civilian transports, our observational orbital infrastructure. They recorded everything in plain sight. She paused. They did not investigate the primary structures in our asteroid formation. They did not examine our deep subsurface installations. They did not request documentation on 11 separate engineering programs that your teams passed without querying. She looked directly at on a TH. They did not ask because they assumed the answers would not be interesting. The Golfani block representative had stopped talking. Telerainer had put his console down. The SSNVOR had not moved in 3 minutes. I am here to inform this assembly that assumption was the most significant miscalculation the Solathi hegemony has made in 40 years. On the TH's secondary jaw slid forward 2 millimeters and stopped. Is that a threat, delegate? It is information, Marin said, offered freely. What this assembly does with it is entirely a matter for this assembly. The vote ran 20 minutes later. On the TH had arranged 29 markers in advance. Marin cast the single vote against. Speaker Scialun's marker sat on her desk through the entire count, untouched, and when the tally closed, it remained there. She abstained. In 600 years, Scialun had not abstained on a motion. The authorization passed. The fleet order went out within 4 minutes. 280 warships, already staged at Kairoth Station, received their coordinates and began the long arc toward the Cradle System. 17 galactic days to Earth. Marin gathered her documents, rose, and walked out without speaking to anyone. Footsteps came behind her in the corridor, long, measured, unhurried. She stopped and turned. The SS&BO stood alone. His staff was absent. He had moved faster than she had ever seen him move, which was not fast by any standard, but the effort was not nothing. You were not performing back there, he said. No, Marin said. His secondary eyelid was fully up. He was looking at her with the expression of a Veluran who has spent 300 years developing professional detachment and is finding it, at this particular moment, insufficient. Where does this assembly not know? He asked. Marin reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. A graphite chip mat. No markings. Palm sized. The weight of almost nothing. She held it between the fingers. Not extended yet, just visible. 13 years of what we chose not to say. She told him. Read it tonight. She held his gaze. The first time, you will think I am describing something unlikely. The second time, you will understand I was being conservative. She turned and walked to the communications room at the end of the corridor. Locked the door. Opened an encrypted channel routed through for relay points. Then typed one word. Begin. Across the cradle system, every screen in Director Sable Mwanza's operations center lit up simultaneously. Sable Mwanza had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours since the word arrived. The operations center ran on a 24-hour cycle from the moment the activation code went out. Every section of Earth's defense network had a dedicated display: orbital mechanics, fleet positioning, platform grid status, drone readiness, rail network calibration, communications intercepts, and those displays never went dark. Sable moved between stations with a tablet in one hand and cold coffee in the other, and in 5 days she had not raised her voice once, because there was no reason to. Her staff knew exactly what to do. They had been training for this specific contingency for the better part of a decade. The number that organized everything was 17. 17 galactic days, roughly 21 Earth days. The fleet was already moving. No diplomatic channel remained. The only variable that still mattered was readiness. Unreadiness was the one thing Earth had spent 9 years building toward. On day 2, engineer Nate Caro sat at the central console of a structure in the Tesser Eep that official records described as an autonomous mineral extraction unit. He entered a 16-digit authorization code that only 7 people on Earth knew in complete form, and watched a progress bar begin moving. Platform 1 of the grid came online. Then 2. Then 3. The count accelerated, sweeping outward in both directions across the entire Tesser and formation structures that hegemony survey teams had documented as relay hours. Charging depots, passive sensor nodes, each one opening its primary systems, powering its weapons, confirming operational status. 4 hours later, 4,800 platforms had reported in. The engineer at the adjacent station had been watching the activation map fill without speaking. Then, quietly, we actually built all of them. Nate picked up his mud. Everyone. 9 years. Different construction teams working different sectors simultaneously. Each group unaware of the full count. He looked at the completed map. Get them to grid coordinates. Full coverage by day 8. Each platform carried a directed energy projector on a resonance frequency the hegemony's shielding had never been calibrated to counter, because the hegemony's shielding technology had been public record for 40 years. And Earth's engineers had spent considerable time studying exactly where the gaps were. The platforms had independent propulsion borrowed from asteroid redirection programs that had been publicly funded for decades. They could move, track, and engage to any sensor array not specifically designed to find them. They looked like background noise, which was the design. Admiral Fen Caro gave his war briefing at 600 on day 3, standing at the head of the table, looking at the people he had served alongside for most of his career. 44 ships against 280. He said. He let it sit. Stop thinking in those terms. We are not meeting them in open space. We are meeting them inside a system specifically modified for this engagement over 9 years. Every significant mass in the Tesseran formation. Every platform in orbital range. Every deep installation on every moon is part of this fight. He looked around the table. Our task is to ensure there is not a single approach vector in this system that does not cost them more than they plan to pay. No one argued. General Priya Akindai, running ground orbital forces from a reinforced installation in the Western Highlands, ran her briefings at the pace of someone who had spent 8 years building something and was now, finally, in the operational phase. The kinetic rail network embedded across 6 continents, coastal platforms, mountain installations, deep water launch systems had taken 8 years to complete. Each launcher was capable of sending a dense tungsten round at 13 kilometers per second. At orbital altitude, the kinetic yield was equivalent to a tactical warhead. The hegemony survey teams had cataloged several of these installations under the heading Geological Research Facilities. Priya had reviewed that paperwork personally. She had never found it troubling. On day 7, Dr. Hilbrand presented her tactical analysis to Finn's senior staff. She had spent the week reading every battle record and behavioral profile in Earth's intelligence archive on the Solathi hegemony. The hegemony wins conflicts by breaking will, not by destroying capability, she said. Every annexation in their history followed the same sequence: arrive in overwhelming force, demonstrate immediate capability, then wait for the subject population to fragment and seek terms. She looked around the room. They have never fought a species that absorbed serious damage in the opening phase and became more coordinated afterward. Their doctrine has no category for that pattern. When it happens, and it will, their commanders will have no guidance for what they're seeing. Fen looked at her. How confident? Completely. Yale said. They have never encountered anything like us. The hegemony fleet dropped out of transit at the outer boundary of the cradle system on the morning of Day 17 of Day 17. Fleet Commander Vor-Th stood at his forward observation deck and studied the pale yellow star at the center of the system. His sensors showed a quiet planet, blue-green and small, sitting exactly where the data said it would be. No defense fleet on approach. Nothing unusual in the asteroid formation. Orbital space around the third planet was still. Begin the advance, he said, 43 kilometers ahead of his Vanguard's led ship. The first Tesseran platform powered up, rotated its projector, and locked on. The Vanguard crossed the outer marker at 611 hours 50 ships. Tight formation. Sensor returns showing nothing worth noting. They had gone 43 kilometers into the formation when the first platform fired. The lead destroyer took the impact in its forward shield array. The shield held, but the resonance frequency was unlike anything the ship's automated defense system had ever processed, and the system spent for tenths of a second recalligrating. That was enough time for a second platform to fire. Then a third. Then the number of incoming contacts became impossible to track individually. 17 hegemony ships were gone in the first 90 seconds. Not retreating. Gone. Their energy signatures ending cleanly on the display. The platforms were firing from inside the rock formations, from below the orbital plane, from angles that no ship-mounted weapon could occupy without years of prepositioned installation. Vor-Th ordered his Vanguard to reverse and regroup. The order was transmitted and acknowledged, and then something occurred that existed in no tactical record in hegemony military history. The platforms followed them out. They came out of the rock formations on their own drives, tracking the retreating formation, maintaining engagement range, continuing to fire. Too numerous to prioritize individually, too mobile to outrun on a short vector. The 50 ships that had entered the Tesseran formation emerged on the other side as 31. Vor-Th stared at his display for 4 full seconds without speaking. What where? He said quietly. Are those? His intelligence officer had no answer. The platforms were not in the survey database. They had not existed, as far as any hegemony file was concerned, until 90 seconds ago. He redirected his main battle group. 220 ships swept around the formation in a wide flanking arc, curving behind the gas giant on a classical envelopment heading that had succeeded in 31 prior campaigns. The plan bypassed the formation entirely. Approached the third planet from the system's southern axis, where the survey data showed the lightest defensive concentration. The survey data had not accounted for Mars. Earth's colony on the fourth planet had been growing for 42 years. Assembly records described it as a civilian settlement, mining operations, research facilities, low-gravity agriculture. What those records did not reflect was that the colony's excavated hangars held 55,000 autonomous drone units, each the size of a ground transport vehicle, each armed with a short-range energy disruptor and an impact frame designed to survive multiple collisions before losing function. General Okendi gave the launch order from the Western Highlands at 719 hours. The drones rose from the Martian surface in an unbroken stream, crossed the gap in 38 minutes, and spread into a dispersed field across the entire width of the hegemony's flanking corridor. What happened when the main battle group entered that field? Vor-Th's tactical officer would later describe in the official incident log as operationally unprecedented. The drones did not attack in formation. They did not move according to any pattern a hegemony tactical system could model. They attacked individually from separate vectors, targeting propulsion housings, sensor arrays, shield generator nodes. When one was destroyed, the next identified the gap and filled it. 55,000 targets that did not coordinate in any way their doctrine anticipated. The flanking advance lost 40 ships in its formation integrity before clearing the drone field. What came through on the far side was a disorganized battle group that needed hours to reform. Those hours were not available. 4TH directed everything remaining toward Earth orbit directly. 152 ships. Straight heading. Re-momentum. He needed to reach the planet. Once in orbital position, he could apply the kind of sustained pressure that at every conflict the hegemony had ever prosecuted. This had always been the stage where opposition collapsed. He reached Earth's orbital shell at 1330 hours and ordered bombardment to begin. The surface fired back 12 tungsten rounds at 13 kilometers per second from installations on 4 continents simultaneously, traveling from the planet's surface to orbital altitude in under a minute. The hegemony heavy cruisers were struck before their crews registered the fire originated from the ground. The hegemony's tactical doctrine had classified surface weapons as a secondary consideration for 200 years, something addressed after orbital control was secured. No species in hegemony history had ever struck a vessel at orbital altitude from a surface-based kinetic launcher at that velocity. A second salvo came 9 minutes later, then a third. Then Admiral Fencaro brought the Lancer fleet out from the outer system at 14:07 hours. 44 ships against 152. Faster, more maneuverable. Designed over 9 years for one specific purpose, fighting a numerically superior force at close orbital range, where the size advantage of a larger warship becomes a liability rather than an asset. The pilots had run this exact scenario in simulation more times than most could accurately count. 4TH's crews had run nothing comparable, because nothing comparable had ever been considered necessary. The engagement ran at full intensity for 9 hours. 6 Earth ships lost, each loss real. Final. Log by name. Examined afterward without euphemism. The circumstances documented. The gaps identified. The next version of the plan would need to be better. But the hegemony's losses were continuous. By R6, 4TH's fleet had lost its operational coherence, individual ships responding to immediate threats in isolation, which was precisely the condition Fenn's plan had been designed to produce. At R8, 3 hegemony destroyers were boarded, teams of 12 to 15, entering through hull access points created by cutting equipment that appeared in no survey catalog. They moved through the interior corridors in a way that matched no doctrine 4TH recognized, communicating constantly in short rapid exchanges, changing direction in real time. When 3 hegemony soldiers held a corridor against a 2-person approach, a third team member moved through the ship's internal infrastructure above the corridor and arrived from a direction that should not have been viable. Improvised, relentless, effective, all 3 destroyers disabled from the inside in under 35 minutes. 4TH had been in military service for 40 years. He had never watched an enemy board one of his ships and succeed. There are 9. He sent the ceasefire request. Marin read it twice, told the keyboard toward her, typed herself, complete and unconditional withdrawal, full reparations, 4TH before the full assembly within 30 days. She sent it, sat back, let the room be quiet. She was not angry, not triumphant. She was the specific kind of still that belongs to people who spent years preparing for a moment and have now, quietly, lived past it. 14 minutes later, full acceptance. All terms. She closed the channel and asked Sable what the next open item was. Grand Speaker Sialoon called the emergency session before the withdrawal was complete. Every delegation attended in person. No absences. No proxy votes. The hall was full in a way it had not been in a decade. And the silence before Sialoon opened the session was the silence of a room where no one was entirely certain what they were about to be shown. She ordered the compiled footage played without preamble. It ran for just over 2 hours, assembled from 17 observation buoys, 3 recovered hegemony hull cameras, cross-referenced with sensor logs to produce a complete sequential record of the engagement from first contact to ceasefire. Nobody spoke during the footage. The Gulf Ani block representatives who had produced that brief shared dismissive sound during TH's original presentation sat motionless. The BLUV delegation watched every second. Telerainer watched with his hands pressed flat on his desk, in a posture he would not have recognized as borrowed from anyone. When the footage concluded, TH was first to speak. Controlled expression. Secondary jaws till the footage could not be independently verified. Data manipulation was technically possible in the outer system. An independent review process should be initiated. Marin placed the cross-validation documentation on the shared display before anyone else could respond. 17 independent observation sources, she said, including for that maintain no diplomatic relationship with the Cradle delegation. Sensor logs correspond across all 17 without discrepancy. And the TH said nothing further. The debate that followed was unlike any session in the Assembly's modern era. The Valoran delegation convened an internal conference for 52 minutes before their representatives spoke publicly. The GULRI observers, silent in Assembly sessions for 6 years, formally requested a review of Earth species classification. Several delegations seconded immediately. Others did so through notes rather than public statements, but seconded nonetheless. A classified xenopsychology report circulated through Assembly channels during the midday recess. Its core conclusion occupying 3 sentences: this species does not respond to existential pressure with fragmentation or the seeking of terms. It responds with increased coordination and accelerated capability development. We have no reliable method for estimating the ceiling of this response. Marin addressed the chamber on the second day. 14 minutes. Voice level. She stated that Earth was revising its membership status from provisional to full sovereign, effective immediately and without negotiation, and that any future military action against the Cradle system would warrant a collective response. Then she announced that in the 20 months preceding the Hegemony's campaign, Earth had concluded mutual defense agreements with 14 Assembly member civilizations. She named each one. Most were small. Most had been Assembly members longer than many of the current major powers. Most had spent decades on the margins of Assembly proceedings, their survival calculated by the blocks around them as a variable rather than a value. They had all been watching the hegemony carefully for a very long time. The chamber produced a sound that Sialun allowed to run for 30 seconds before calling order. And the TH's delegation had gone very still. Sable Mwanza's work in the months following the battle was less visible than almost anything else happening in Earth's institutions, and considerably more unsettling. The intelligence recovered from the 3 boarded destroyers had taken weeks to fully process. Most of the data was expected tactical logs, navigation records, fleet communications. Sable moved through it methodically, without surprises, until the 44th day after the battle, when a junior analyst flagged an anomaly in a subset of command-level communications from the 8 weeks preceding the campaign's launch. 7 communications, all originating from the same relay point in neutral space, all addressed to a specific node embedded within Hegemony High Command. Taken individually, the content was not unusual strategic assessments, resource projections, political analysis regarding the Cradle system, but every single assessment was wrong in the same direction. Every resource projection overstated the ease of the operation. Every piece of political analysis concluded the campaign carried minimal risk. Every evaluation of Earth's defensive capability described it as negligible. The messages had been composed, specifically and consistently, to make the hegemony confident enough to rely on survey data 8 years old, confident enough to send 280 ships into a system they had not genuinely studied. The relay point of origin was not a hegemony location, not any Earth location, not anything Sable Systems could match against the Assembly's navigational records or any member state database she could access. She ran the signature through every archive Earth's intelligence division maintained, through 3 Assembly-affiliated databases, through 2 of Nate's external sensor databases that were not technically accessible from her terminal, that were, because she and Nate had arrangement from 3 years ago that neither of them had documented. The signature matched nothing on record. And tracing the relay backward through the recovered hegemony archives, it had been active for years. A steady, consistent stream of information about Earth into Hegemony High Command, each piece designed to build and reinforce the same conclusion: humanity was not dangerous. The Cradle system was easy. The operation would be brief. Someone had wanted this specific conflict to happen, had invested years making it happen, had done all of it without leaving any trace in any record that Earth's intelligence division had known to look for. Someone had wanted Earth and the hegemony to destroy each other. Sable sat with the full picture for 2 days. Then she brought it to Fen in his office at the docked Ardent Meridian and laid it out in sequence, without editorializing. Fen read the report, read it again, looked out the office window for a while. How old is the oldest signal in the chain? 7 years before our Assembly application, Sable said. 3 years before Earth submitted its membership request. Fen looked at her. They were watching us before we entered the room. Yes, and their intended outcome was mutual destruction. That is how I read it. A long moment. Outside the window, a Lancer-class docking arm moved through its automated positioning sequence, slow and precise, Then we need to find them, Fen said, before they decide what different looks like. Sable nodded. She had already begun. 3 months after the battle, Grand Speaker Xiaolun cleared her schedule for an afternoon and sat alone in her private chambers with the graphite chip the SS and VOR had passed to her through formal Veluran channels. She read it twice. As instructed, the chip contained 11 years of Earth strategic development record engineering programs, research initiatives, political consolidation records, defense infrastructure timelines, simulation logs, a population-wide psychological resilience study conducted across 8 years. A forward threat analysis dated 9 years ago that described, with accuracy Xiaolun found uncomfortable, the exact political process by which a larger galactic power might choose to target a recently admitted provisional member with no established alliances and no institutional weight. Every file carried a creation date. The earliest predated Earth's assembly application by 4 years. They had been preparing before they arrived. They had entered the assembly already built for the possibility that entering would attract the wrong kind of attention. And in 13 years since, they had sat in the hall being catalogued and dismissed, and in all of that time, they had never stopped building, never sought reassurance from any outside source, and never told anyone. Not because they were hostile, because they understood that the universe does not wait for anyone to be ready. Near the end of the chip, past all the operational material, was a file different from everything else. Short. Not a report or a plan. A letter, written by hand and scanned into the record. The translation at the bottom read, "Eid. We have been watching the stars for a very long time. We always believed someone was coming. We were never certain of when. We built this for the day we would need it. We hope it is enough. We believe it will be." Xiaolun sat with the letter for a long time. Then she reached for her communicator and placed a call to her chief of intelligence. "Comprehensive study," she said when the call connected. "Full-scope infrastructure, engineering programs, psychological frameworks, cultural history. Not a survey. A genuine study. Start from the beginning and do not skip anything." I pause. "Which species?" "Grand Speaker?" She looked at the letter on her desk. "Humans," she said. "We should have done this 11 years ago." In the late afternoon of a clear autumn day, Admiral Fen Caro stood on a cliff above the sea and watched the light change across the water. The sun was low. The sky had turned the specific deep orange that lasts about 10 minutes before full dark. When off the water was cold enough that he had his collar up. He had not stood still in an empty space for more than 3 consecutive minutes in 4 months, and he was not certain the next 4 would be different. Too much being built. Too many structures being established. Too much work ahead before the thing Sable had found made its next move. He had come here alone, without notifying anyone. His communicator activated. 3 notifications. The first from Marin to new compact membership applications, species not on any likely candidate list 3 months ago. Formal response required within the week. The second from Nate platform production status. Day 197. Ahead of the revised schedule by 18 days. 931 replacement units confirmed operational. 2,400 more in active construction. The third from Sable. Priority flagged. New findings in the relay signature investigation. Fan looked at the 3 notifications. Then he looked back at the water. The orange at the horizon was deepening toward dark at the edges. He watched it for 10 more seconds. Counting. The chip sat in Xiaolun's chambers on the convergent spire, turning over questions that would not resolve quickly. The relay signature sat in Sable's archive, patient and sourceless, waiting to be found. The platforms moved through the Tesserand formation to their replacement coordinates, quiet and invisible, exactly where they were supposed to be. He put the communicator in his pocket, turned, walked back toward the lights,